The camera bag felt heavier than usual that evening. Maybe it was nerves. Maybe it was the weight of everything I'd been carrying for the past 8 months. The late-night texts I wasn't supposed to see. The cologne that wasn't his brand. The way my husband had started closing his laptop the moment I walked into the room. I'm 63 years old. I've raised 3 children, buried my mother, survived a breast cancer scare at 51, and built a 27-year marriage with a man I thought I knew down to his last breath. I know what secrets look like. I know what they smell like. And I knew, standing in the parking garage of the Harrington Convention Center in my black blazer with a borrowed cannon around my neck, that tonight I was going to find out exactly what kind of secret my husband had been keeping. Let me back up. My husband, I'll call him by what he is, my husband of 27 years, had been working at Caldwell & Marsh Financial Group for 11 years. He was a senior analyst, respected, well compensated. The kind of man who got handshakes at the grocery store from people whose mortgages he'd helped structure. I was proud of him. For most of those 11 years, I was genuinely, quietly proud. The annual holiday gala at Caldwell & Marsh was a big deal. Black tie, open bar, the kind of event where the CEO gave a speech and handed out crystal trophies to top performers. My husband had gone every year. I had gone with him for the first several years, until the kids got older and the holidays got busier, and somewhere along the way it became his thing. I didn't mind. I had my own life, my part-time work at the library, my book club, my garden that took up more of my soul than I'd ever admit to anyone. This year he told me the gala was employees only, no spouses. New policy, he said, something about the venue size and budget cuts. He mentioned it casually over dinner one Tuesday in November, not quite meeting my eyes when he said it. I nodded. I said, "That's fine." But I'd already seen the invitation on his desk 2 weeks before that conversation. It said, clearly, in the bottom right corner, "Employees and their guests warmly welcomed." I didn't say anything that night. I just started making a plan. My neighbor's daughter, Priya, runs a small photography business, weddings, corporate events, family portraits. I'd known her since she was 9 years old and used to sell lemonade in our cul-de-sac. When I called her and explained what I needed, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Mrs. Patterson, I'll loan you my equipment and my credentials. You just tell me you're going to be okay." I told her I didn't know yet. She said that was honest enough. Priya had actually been hired to photograph this same gala 2 years prior, so she still had the vendor contact information. I called the event coordinator, explained that Priya had a family emergency and I was her associate filling in. They confirmed my badge by email within 48 hours. It was almost too easy. Looking back, I think the universe was making a door and leaving it open. The night of the gala, my husband left the house at 6:15. He kissed me on the cheek. He smelled like the cologne I had bought him for Christmas 3 years ago. That part was familiar, at least. And he said he probably wouldn't be home until midnight. "These things run long," he said. I stood at the kitchen window and watched his car back out of the driveway, and I felt something settle in my chest. A kind of cold, quiet clarity that I imagine soldiers must feel just before they walk into something they can't walk back from. I left 30 minutes later. The Harrington was dressed up beautifully. Garlands of pine and white lights wound around the columns at the entrance, and a string quartet was playing something that might have been Vivaldi in the lobby. There were maybe 200 people already inside when I arrived, women in gowns and men in tuxedos holding champagne flutes and laughing too loudly, the way people do when they're trying to perform happiness at work events. I collected my vendor badge at the side entrance, and no one looked twice at me. That's one thing about being 63 and carrying a camera. People look right through you. You become part of the scenery. I spent the first 40 minutes doing exactly what I was supposed to do. I photographed the welcome table, the floral arrangements, the CEO greeting early arrivals. I kept moving, kept the camera up. My heart was beating so fast I was certain someone near me could hear it. but I kept my face neutral. Decades of motherhood teach you that. You learn to look calm when you are anything but. I found my husband near the bar. He was laughing. It was his real laugh, the full one, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and I hadn't seen it directed at me in longer than I could immediately remember. He was talking to a small group, 2 men I didn't recognize, a woman in her late 30s with dark hair and a green dress that fit her beautifully. I raised my camera and pretended to frame a shot of the centerpiece on the table nearby, and through the lens I watched him put his hand on the small of her back. Briefly, naturally, the way you touch someone when touching them is already a habit. I lowered the camera. I had known. I had told myself I knew. But there is a canyon of difference between knowing something in the abstract and watching it happen in real time while you are standing 15 feet away, wearing a vendor badge with your neighbor's daughter's name on it. I took a breath, then another. I thought about my garden, specifically the rose bed along the back fence that I'd been trying to get right for 6 years, and how last spring it had finally bloomed the way I'd always imagined it would. I thought, I have been patient before. I can be patient tonight. I kept working. Over the next hour, I learned her name. I'll call her what she was, my husband's colleague, from the table cards. She was seated at the same table as my husband, which was, notably, not the table where spouses typically sat at past galas. There were no spouses at that table, just my husband and 7 of his colleagues, and her, directly to his left. The dinner progressed. I moved through the room, photographing. I was grateful for the camera because it gave my hands something to do and my face something to hide behind. I photographed the salad course, the main course, the CEO's table, the young employees gathered near the dessert display. I was careful to stay on the periphery of my husband's table, never close enough to be recognized in his peripheral vision. Then came the speeches. The CEO, a silver-haired man named Mr. Caldwell, whom I had met exactly once at a company picnic in 2019, stood at the podium and thanked everyone for a strong year. He talked about growth, resilience, the firm's expansion into 2 new markets. Then he began the awards portion of the evening. This year's Distinguished Achievement Award goes to someone who has been the quiet backbone of our restructuring initiative, he said. Someone who spent the better part of 18 months building the analytical framework that allowed us to navigate a very turbulent period and come out stronger on the other side. The room applauded. The person I'm about to name worked long hours, sacrificed weekends, and showed a level of professional dedication that this company does not take lightly. I was positioned near the back of the room, and I had my camera up, aimed at the podium. My finger was on the shutter. Please join me in congratulating. He said her name. She stood. The woman in the green dress stood, and the room applauded, and my husband was on his feet before almost anyone else, clapping with an enthusiasm that made 2 of his table mates glance over at him and smile knowingly. She walked to the podium. She shook Mr. Caldwell's hand and accepted a crystal award and said something gracious and humble into the microphone about the team effort and the support she'd received. She was poised. She was impressive. I could see, from where I stood, exactly why someone might fall for her. But here is what made my blood run cold and my hands go very, very still on the camera. My husband, 6 months ago, had told me that he was leading that restructuring initiative. Those exact words, I'm leading the restructuring initiative, and if it goes the way I think it will, we're looking at a significant bonus this spring. He had said it over dinner. I had asked him about it several times over the following months. He had given me updates, his progress, his projections. I had listened. I had been proud. The award that had just been given to my husband's colleague was the award for work my husband had told me he was doing. I stood in the back of that ballroom for a long moment and understood that there were 2 betrayals happening at once. The one I had come to find, and the one I hadn't known to look for. The speeches continued. I kept photographing. I want you to understand something about that stretch of time. maybe 45 minutes between that realization and what I did next, because I think it matters. I was not acting out of rage. I want to be clear about that. I have seen what rage does to people. I have watched it make them ugly and small, watched it strip them of every advantage. What I felt was something quieter and much more resolute. It was the feeling of a door closing. It was grief, actually, if I'm being precise. Grief for the version of my marriage that I had apparently been living alone inside of for longer than I'd realized. I used that time well. I have been a library assistant for 14 years, and whatever people imagine that job involves, I assure you it has made me extraordinarily good at finding and organizing information quickly and quietly. While the dancing portion of the evening began and the lights lowered and the music got louder, I reviewed the photographs I had taken. I had, without fully intending to, documented the entire evening thoroughly, his hand on her back, the two of them at dinner, leaning in, his standing ovation for her award. I also, from my vantage point near the AV table, had a clear shot of a slide the company had displayed during the achievements presentation, a slide that credited her by name as lead analyst on the restructuring project. Project dates, January through September of this year. The same months my husband had been telling me it was his project. Near the end of the evening, there was an informal toast. One of the senior partners, an older man, red-faced and warm with holiday cheer, clinked his glass and said he wanted to add a personal note to the night's celebrations. He looked at my husband and at the woman in the green dress, who were standing together near the edge of the dance floor, and he grinned. "I'm not supposed to say anything official," he said, loud enough for the dozen people nearby to hear. "But I've got eyes, and I think most of us in this room have got eyes, and I just want to say, it has been a genuine pleasure watching two people find each other." He raised his glass. "To new beginnings, whatever form they take." People laughed. My husband's face went briefly red, and then he smiled. He put his arm around her shoulders. She looked up at him. She was not hiding anything. Whatever this was, she was not hiding it. And neither, it turned out, was he, not from his colleagues, not from his world, only from me. I thought about my daughter, who is 31 and currently planning her own wedding, and who had called me last week to ask my advice about how to handle a difficult in-law situation with Grace. I thought about what I was going to tell my son, who is 28 and who still looks at his father the way he did when he was 7. I thought about the years, not in a sentimental way, but practically the way you'd think about any long-term investment, and what they were actually worth. I walked to the AV table and introduced myself to the young man managing the presentation equipment. I told him I was the event photographer and that Mr. Caldwell had asked me to display a brief photo tribute at the end of the evening as a surprise for the staff. He was maybe 24, eager to be helpful. He handed me the cable. I connected my camera. I want to be precise about what I chose to show because I was precise about it in the moment. I was not trying to humiliate anyone beyond what the truth required. I put up 7 photographs. The first was my husband and his colleague at dinner, his body turned toward her in a way that no one who has been married for 27 years would mistake for collegial. The second was the toast, the senior partner raising his glass, my husband's arm around her. The third to sixth were a series I had taken during the awards presentation, including a clear, well-lit image of the projected slide crediting her as lead analyst on the project my husband had spent months describing to me as his own. The seventh was the two of them near the exit at the end of the evening, her hand in his. When the images appeared on the screen behind the podium, the room took a moment to catch up. Then it got very quiet. My husband saw the screen from across the room. I watched him see it. I watched the color leave his face in a way that 27 years had never shown me. His colleague followed his gaze, and she went still too. I set the camera down on the AV table, very carefully. because it was Priya's equipment and it wasn't mine to be careless with. Then I walked through the room. I want you to understand, I did not hurry. I walked at a normal pace through the parting crowd, and several people stepped aside without fully understanding why. Maybe they could see something in the way I was moving. Maybe 63 years of living just shows up in a person's posture. My husband found me near the main doors. He was pale and his bow tie was slightly crooked from how fast he'd moved across the room. "Let me explain," he said. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about the rose bed and the 6 years and last spring. "I have all the explanation I need," I said. "I have it documented, in fact, in very good resolution. You don't understand what's been happening." "You told me you were leading the restructuring project," I said. "For 8 months, you told me that. I listened to every update. I was proud of you." I paused. "Was any of it yours?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. "That's what I thought," I said. I left. The parking garage was cold and quiet, and I sat in my car for a while before I started the engine. I didn't cry right away. That came later, at home, in the kitchen, at about 2 in the morning, in the way that grief comes when you finally let it. But in the parking garage, I was still in that clear, cold place. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. They were steady. I had driven myself there. I was going to drive myself home. In the weeks that followed, I spoke with an attorney. I organized our financial documents, 27 years of joint accounts, property, retirement funds. I made appointments. I made lists. I told my children when I was ready, in my own words, in my own time, without drama, and without asking them to choose sides. My daughter cried. My son was very quiet for a long time and then said, "Mom, what do you need?" I told him I needed a good cup of coffee and someone to help me move the bookshelf in the living room, and we did both of those things that same afternoon. The woman in the green dress, from what I eventually understood, had not known he was married, or perhaps she had known and had chosen not to look at it directly. I'm 63. Not naive, and I understand that people can want something badly enough to not ask the questions that might take it away. I don't carry particular bitterness toward her. She has to make her own peace with her own choices. My husband, for his part, lost considerably more than his marriage when those photographs circulated through a company where his colleagues had watched him take credit for someone else's work. Professional consequences have a way of following a person with the clarity that personal ones sometimes don't. I did not engineer that. I simply documented what was true. I am 63 years old. I wake up now in a house that is quieter than I'm used to, in a life that still has its shape but needs some reframing, the way a garden does after a hard winter. I have my book club. I have Priya, who brought me flowers when I returned her camera bag and who did not ask me a single question until I was ready to answer them. I have my children, who are good people, and I believe they are good people partly because of what I taught them about patience and truth and not walking away from either one. Someone at my book club asked me recently whether I regretted how I'd handled it, whether I wished I'd just left quietly or confronted him at home or done anything differently. I thought about it honestly. I do that. I try to think about things honestly, even when the honest answer is complicated. I don't regret the truth, I said. I only regret that I needed to go find it myself. She nodded, like she understood. Maybe she did. The camera bag is back at Priya's studio. The rose bed needs pruning this spring. I have about 6 months of financial paperwork left to organize, and then I think I might finally take that trip to the Pacific Northwest that I have been putting off for 11 years. I want to see the old-growth forests. I want to stand in the middle of something ancient and enormous, and understand that it has been through things I cannot imagine and is still standing. I think I'll recognize the feeling,